Hi, my name is Satvir Kalsi. I'm a medical student, entrepreneur, and passionate advocate for addressing age-related disease. In the 1990s, Nobel Prize-winning immunologist Ilya Machinkov wrote, "Aging is a disease and it should be treated like any other." Indeed, some of the most debilitating and prevalent diseases of our age, such as cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, stroke, cardiovascular diseases like heart attacks and heart failure, all share aging as one of their major risk factors. It seems if you grow old enough, many of these diseases, unfortunately, become inevitable. So what is aging? Aging really is a consequence of physics. It is a lifelong accumulation of damage to the body that occurs as an intrinsic side effect of the body's normal operation over time. Now, cellular damage over time begins to accumulate, and cells, these fundamental building blocks of our bodies and minds, begin to lose the ability to do the job they've been doing so well since we were young and healthy. Now, this happens in almost all living organisms to some extent, and for the majority of the history of life on this planet, we haven't really been able to do anything about it. So what can we really do about it? As it turns out, there are only so many ways a cell can die, and there are only so many ways that it can end up accumulating damage and contributing to aging. One scientific paper actually introduces these quote-unquote hallmarks of aging. They introduce 9 of these hallmarks, which include things like stem cell exhaustion, epigenetic alterations, telomere attrition, and genomic instability. Now, in order to be a hallmark of aging, your hallmark only really needs 3 things. 1, the hallmark should be there during normal aging. 2, experimentally ramping up that hallmark should accelerate aging. And finally, 3, experimentally suppressing your hallmark should also suppress the normal aging process and increase healthy lifespan. Now, if you can find something that fits all 3 of these things tonight or tomorrow, well, you found something very valuable and should email me. Now, as we begin to understand more and more about biology and chemistry and how our cells work, the tools of science allowed us to probe questions of aging more carefully. Lots of hard work done by thousands of scientists spanning many decades and countries has given us a picture of what tackling aging might look like. One of the most promising approaches is rejuvenation biotechnology. So what is rejuvenation biotechnology? Rejuvenation biotechnology is a medical technology that directly addresses any of the aging processes, like hallmarks and the root causes, in order to restore tissue and organ function to a more youthful state, thus delaying or preventing age-related diseases. Now, this seems like such a no-brainer that it begs the question why it's worth pointing out. Well, the rejuvenation biotechnology approach is slightly different from the approaches used currently. Current methods of dealing with aging focus on dealing with its damage rather than addressing the process itself. Ideally, we would want cells to behave correctly, and when they don't, we would want to correct them to a healthier state. Now, if you're wondering whether something is a rejuvenation biotechnology or not, just ask, does it comprehensively address a hallmark of aging? In fact, several active rejuvenation biotechnology endeavors are currently targeting all 9 hallmarks of aging, 11 of which are on phase 2 clinical trials, and 3 of which are in phase 3 clinical trials. Now, these regenerative technologies often target molecular pathways that are important in tissue repair and maintenance and are deregulated with aging. For example, Samumed is just one example of a biotech company doing this by targeting the Wnt pathway. So what stands in our way? It turns out addressing the hallmarks of aging in a comprehensive, safe, and reliable way is hard. It requires a lot of research and development, and it turns out there are really only a few things that could stymie such a grand project. One of the biggest hurdles that slows us down can be understood with a little perspective. Now, it's estimated that of the roughly 150,000 people who die each day across the globe, about 2/3, so that's 100,000 per day, die of age-related causes. 100,000 people a day. Now, to put this in perspective, around 11,000 people die each day from homicide, and around 3,500 die from road injuries. Terrorism, poisonings, and natural disasters barely add up to 300 a day combined. 100,000 a day from aging. In industrialized nations, the proportion of people dying of age-related causes is actually much higher, reaching 90%. Take a second and let this proportion sink in. 90% of deaths are due to age-related causes. Is this proportion reflected in the news we hear, the reports we read? Does it resonate in the hearts and minds of millions of people 90% of the time? 50% of the time? When was the last time you heard about the newest basic science research into addressing aging? Addressing a problem can be difficult if it doesn't even occupy our attention. So how do we raise money for the basic science research on aging if no one knows it's a problem, if no one knows it's an addressable problem? Tackling aging is hard, but it's not impossible to believe that if everyone understood its magnitude, ethically, financially, and personally, that the big marble block that is the problem of aging could very quickly chip down into dust at the feet of a global society bent on solving it. Now, the ill health of old age looms over all of us. While the elderly are primarily victims of age-related diseases such as Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, and cancer, the impact of age-related ill health collaterally affects families as well. The pain of seeing loved ones become increasingly fragile, sick, and dependent can be heartbreaking. But this doesn't have to be inevitable. Scientific breakthroughs in medicine have already started promising a healthier future. But to secure this future, we are going to have to start investing in today. On average, it takes 17 years for a discovery to go from data in the lab on a bench to therapies at the bedside. Where will you be 20 years from now? How about the oldest person you know? These therapies are coming. These technologies are inevitable. It is only a matter of when we get there that's in our hands today. Now, how many cohorts of humanity do we condemn to suffer the ails of age-related disease before we realize we could have done something about it? We must invest time, energy, and perhaps the greatest commodity of all, our attention, to solving these problems. Denial of medical care, innovation, or advocacy to elderly patients is one of the cruelest forms of ageism. There exists a brighter, healthier future for everyone, regardless of age. No longer can we allow ourselves to be held captive by the moral blindness that has allowed humanity to condemn entire cohorts of humanity to the same cruel fate of death, disease, and misery of today's age-related disease. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. Indeed, now is all the time we have ever had to do something to change the future, and we are always working against a clock we cannot see. But now is more than enough, because for as long as humanity has existed, now is all we have ever had." I'll leave you with this last message. Hundreds of years ago, voyages around the world were only funded and launched by kings and countries. Today, you could wake up, decide to sail the seas, and practically no one could stop you from charting your course across the globe. It has never been easier to do the impossible. Why should rejuvenation technology and the pursuit of health be any different? It wasn't too long ago that a few Dutch traders realized that king and country wasn't necessary. They had a radical idea, letting the people invest in them, essentially realizing one of the first ever stock markets, a vehicle for investment and a way for anyone to push their shoulders behind the making of a dream. Today, anyone can help crowdfund science experiments or vote for more government funding for programs addressing health and disease. You could even start your own biotech or get involved in an existing one. potentially curing a devastating disease. Every day, we stand at the precipice of drastic change, and every day we are presented with the opportunity to invest in an expedition to a new world, to chart the course of our future. So that's where we'll meet next, on the sandy shores of that great expanse where the horizon meets the sands that were once thought to be unreachable.